Allahu Akbar. Allahu Akbar. Hayya ala salah. Allahu Akbar.
First, giving all praise due to Allah, causeless cause and the rootless root from which all things have grown. Highest honors to His holy and divine prophet, Noble Drew Ali. We give honors to the forerunner of the prophet, Marcus Mosiah Garvey. Give honors to the Moorish Science Temple of America, as well as honors to everyone in attendance. Certainly appreciate you taking your time out in Saturday afternoon to come spend it with Ali's men. We have guests. It's a pleasant surprise for our guests that have shown up. It's beautiful to see sisters supporting Ali's men and feel safe and welcome enough to come join us, as well as our brethren. So this particular presentation here is entitled Prophet Noble Drew Ali, Decentering Whiteness. What am I talking about?
Go ahead, brother.
Yes, sir. So this whole concept of decentering whiteness, this is drawn from an excerpt of a speech by Mr. Jeff Hitchcock, a speech given at the 3rd National Conference on Whiteness. Who knew that such a conference even existed? University of Chicago, November 7th, 1998. Quoting, "I use the term whiteness to describe such things as white racial identity, white culture, and European Americans as a people. This is different and broader from how other people may use the term. At the Center for the Study of White American Culture, we developed a perspective we call decentering whiteness. In brief, we say that whiteness forms the center of our society in the United States. We believe that no single racial or cultural group should control the center. We need to take whiteness out of the center and replace the center with multiracial values." Now, what we're going to find is, and this is 1998, we're going to find that in the 20s, Prophet Noble Drew Ali did exactly that. For the Moorish Americans and for those whoever tuned in to what he was teaching at that time and what he's been teaching since that time.
Yes, sir.
That being said, this idea of decentering whiteness, we use for an example. I remember Oprah Winfrey made us think about nude pantyhose, right? Nude pantyhose were pale in color. So there was this assumption that nudeness automatically meant European tone. Right? So in that sense, quote unquote whiteness was the standard by which nudeness is measured in America. Even though within America there are a multiplicity of hues with our American citizens.
Right.
So the idea of decentering whiteness, if we were to have quote unquote, and this is a crude example, I'm sorry if it's offensive, that nude pantyhose would have a plethora of colors, an array of colors and tints and shades. Islam? Yes, sir. So how did Noble Drew Ali decenter whiteness for the Moorish Americans? Let's draw from first chapter 46, the beginning of Christianity. Verse 1. The foundation of Christianity began in Rome. Now, we know there were other Christian strains, the Coptics, the Gnostics, etc. But he's identified the particular one in 325 AD.
That's right.
At the Nicene Conference that eventually formed the state religion of Rome. The Roman nations founded the first church, of whom crucified Jesus of Nazareth for seeking to redeem his people from under the Roman yoke and law. Jesus himself was of the true blood of the ancient Canaanites and Moabites and inhabitants of Africa.
That's right.
Now, up until that point, for our people and still for many of our people today, Jesus is portrayed as a European.
Right.
Right? Whether it was Some say the model was Jacques de Molay, who was the head of the Knights Templars. Others say that it was Cesare Borgia. But whoever it was, those Renaissance era paintings formed the ideal for our people and Americans in general of what Prophet Jesus looked like. Noble Drew Ali reversed that by pointing out that Jesus was of the blood of the ancient Canaanites and the Moabites, who scholars would identify those particular ancient nations as Afro-Asiatic, because that term usually is a designation of the language they spoke, Semitic languages, right? Afro-Asiatic. And then he straight up says that the inhabitants of Africa. So the prophet, in so doing that, he decentered the Europeans in the minds of our people and replaced that with ourselves. Our God ideal became reflective of ourselves and not the European.
That's right.
3, seeking to redeem his people in those days from the pressure of the pale-skinned nations of Europe, Rome crucified him according to their law. It's important, I capitalized pale because he didn't say what, the white-skinned peoples of Europe, did he?
No, right.
He said the pale-skinned people of Europe. Noble Drew Ali did not play the American color code classifications of people in any form.
Right.
He said people are known by their nationalities, which is a more realistic worldview, right? Because sometimes we like to, for an example, when we think of peoples in Africa, we say they all quote unquote black or they all Asiatic. But really, those people are composed of different nationalities that all have their own cosmologies, ethnic makeup, self-interest.
Yes, sir.
Right?
Yes, sir.
So in viewing people according to their nationality is a more realistic view than color code system. And pale skin is more reflective of a scientific view, right? Because the idea of whiteness is colloquial. You see a people, you dark, you see them, they pale, or they rudy red, I see them baby say. They're light olive. No one is what? Literally white. No one. So it was a colloquialism that was eventually codified into the law. And we're going to look at how, when, why that happened, that transpired. Yes, sir. Continuing on. Chapter 48. The end of time and the fulfilling of the prophecies. Number 6. Yes, sir. We, as a clean and pure nation descended from the inhabitants of Africa, do not desire to amalgamate or marry into the families of the pale-skinned nations of Europe.
That's right.
Neither serve the gods of their religion.
That's right.
Because our forefathers are the true and divine founders of the first religious creed for the redemption and salvation of mankind on earth. That's decentering whiteness, isn't it?
Facts. That's right.
Do not seek to amalgamate or marry into their families. We do not hold their religions or their God ideals as our own. He has replaced that with our forefathers' religious ideals. Therefore, we are returning the church and Christianity back to the European nations. He didn't say back to the white nations. No.
That's right.
He said back to the European nations. As that was prepared by their forefathers for their earthly salvation, right? And that's why they convened in Nicaea in 325 AD, right? To prepare this religious expression for their people's earthly salvation. 8, while we, the Moorish Americans, are returning to Islam, which was founded by our forefathers for our earthly and divine salvation. Now, Brother Wesley Muhammad, Sister Dana Marnishi, Tariq Berry, Rudolph Ware,
That's right.
our various scholars have demonstrated the phenotypes of the original Arabians who founded Islam, right? So the prophet, this is in 1927 was the general, when this was first published for the general membership of the Moorish Science Temple of America. And much of this research, much of the scholars that I mentioned, they're much recent, where they have detailed phenotypes of what the original Arabians look like.
Right.
But the prophet was telling the Moors this in the 1920s.
Right, that's right.
Islam?
Islam.
Go ahead, brother. Continuing on in how our prophet decentered whiteness for our people. Quran question from our some call the Moorish Catechism, Quran questions for Moorish Americans. Question one, who made you?
Allah.
Who is Allah?
Allah is the Father of the universe.
That's part of the decentering process as well.
Yes, sir.
Because many believe during slavery, we know that after the Middle Passage, they would take our ancestors, forefathers, and foremothers to the Caribbean islands for the seasoning process, where they would break their spirit, all kind of horrific torture, too numerous to mention, horrendous, to make them into a slave. They also use Christianity, particular verses of slaves obey your masters.
Right.
They pull certain verses out to reinforce the slavery ideal, to substantiate it, to rationalize it in the minds of our people. That it was also a psychological seasoning in addition to the physical torture.
Right.
But the prophet is still asking us, who made you? And the answer is Allah, not the white man, not the European.
Come on, brother.
Right? And who is Allah? The Father of the universe.
That's right.
That's who you were made by. So the prophet is like a recalibrating of our mentality. Decentering whiteness and recentering ourselves.
That's right.
85, name some of the marks that were put upon the Moors of Northwest by the European nations in 1774.
Negro, black, colored, Ethiopian.
So, and the reason that's relevant, because they put those marks upon our people, and then they define what those words mean, our people were made in their image.
Woo.
Key one sought to reverse what happened here. 91, what title does Satan give himself?
God. Who?
So the prophet was saying, not only are they not God, what is the name?
Satan.
Another name given for the lower for the lower self,
Go
right?
ahead, say it.
Satan, yes, sir. Oh, I'm not biting my tongue at all, brother. We don't do that here. Right? So this is like the antecedent.
Antithesis.
That's not the word.
It is. Oh.
The origin of the white man is the devil teaching,
Islam.
but not used in that particular language. What title does Satan give himself?
God.
Right? Because again, you have all these Renaissance era paintings that depict the European, Jesus as European, the angels as European,
Right.
even God himself as European. Right? So, but again, we're in Jim Crow era 1920s, where we're being lynched. Our towns are being burnt. All the horrendous, all of the mechanisms that were put in place to prevent us from participating in the political process were happening. So in our lived experience with people of European descent, they were acted very devilish,
That's right. Yes, sir.
right?
That's right.
But again, what the prophet did not do, though, in his decentering them, because the caution is, you don't want to decenter them as the God ideal and then center them as the devil ideal to the point where they're still centered. Even if it's now from the negative end of the pole.
Good point. Good point.
They're Europeans, nothing more, nothing less. 92. Will you define the word white?
White means purity. Purity means God. God means ruler of the land.
This one made me think about Brother Sarnetta. When he's critiquing our teachers and from his mind. White means purity. I don't have good Sarnetta. Purity means God. God means the ruler of the land. So, brother, y'all saying that white people are God? No, we're saying that's why we don't call him white. Because white means purity, and purity means God. God means the ruler of the land.
Right.
Among the Moorish American community, we call them what? Europeans. Not white people. And that's the reason why. Because in English it means purity.
That's right.
So when so by him even using that terminology, he was operating from the European psychology that he's infected the American populace with. That was his standard. He was thinking that these people are really white.
Yep. That's right.
They are not.
Back in the 90s.
Pale skinned nations of Europe, right?
Yes.
And we're going to talk about, again, when this whiteness was codified, this colloquialism that darker people refer to these pale skinned people. They're white in a colloquial sense, right? But not in a scientific sense.
That's right.
Right?
Ready?
Yes, sir. The social construction of whiteness. Racism by intent, racism by consequence. Teresa J. Guest, University of Missouri, St. Louis. Quote, this paper focuses on the social construction of, quote, race with a special attention to the social construction of whiteness. The political significance of race and whiteness in America, and the implications of both as intervening structural barriers in social interaction patterns and in formal and informal social organization in society. Conventional theoretical approaches to the study of American race relations fail to take into account the historical conscious collective of whiteness as social norm, right? So we're saying that prior studies of American relations, the flaw in those studies is they presuppose whiteness as the standard.
Right.
Right? Next. Quote, an archaeology of knowledge about race and whiteness provides a useful strategy for uncovering ways in which symbolic meaning systems, for example, race and whiteness, define, legitimize, and reproduce themselves across generations. Over the past 400 years, scholarship on, quote, race and whiteness has produced human traces. What people do, how they behave, and structure their daily lives, and even how humans are affected by certain ideological stances can all be observed in traces people either intentionally or inadvertently leave behind. This analysis investigates sedimentary traces of socially constructed knowledge about race and whiteness. What are they saying? This teaching through Christianity, through the arts, through the various structures of American society, has reinforced this idea of whiteness and centered it in the minds of American people, and they carry that propaganda out throughout their lives, and it's reflected in how they talk, how they act, etc. Within our community, we have what? Colorism, right? Where we have where if you're closer to the pale skin ideal, that's somehow more favorable than if you're a dark olive Asiatic.
That's true.
That's one example of how the quote unquote ideal of whiteness plays out within our communities.
Right.
And the fact that it's a social construct, meaning that somebody just thought it into existence.
Right.
It's not scientific. It's not real. Islam?
You got Islam. You got
So
good hair,
we're
Mo.
going to discuss, say it again, brother.
So you got good hair, Mo.
It's love. That's another example. Yes, sir. So we're going to explore when and where this thing took root. And it took root in pre-colonial, pre-America as a nation, in colonial America, in Maryland and Virginia. Let's go on. Now, we saw an excerpt of the teachings of Prophet Noble Drew Ali and how he was decentering whiteness for the Moorish Americans, right? And for the Asiatic community at large. This is from an op-ed, as it would be called today, the Moorish Guide in 1928. And the title of this is, What Shall We Call Them? And again, this particular one, I don't think the prophet name is not attributed to it, because again, members of the Moorish Science Temple were writing some of these op-eds in the Moorish Guides too. So we saw the teachings, but this is indicative of the teachings in action, how they were being lived out by Moorish Americans.
Right.
And the conclusions that was being drawn from members as a result of these teachings. And we'll see that, and again, 1928 now. That definition of decentering whiteness was 1998. Quote, so often our various journalists find trouble in selecting the proper name for the Moorish American. Some say Negro. Another would brand him race man. Still another would call him Afro-American. And then some colored, dark American, coon, shine, the brethren, and your folks.
Right.
It is indeed a hard matter to find something suitable for the various occasions where a title needs to be used. Is it that these people have no proper name?
Wow.
Did they have a national name when first brought to these shores in the early part of the 17th century? If so, what was it? Did not the land from which they were forced have a name? It now appears a good idea for those whose duty it is to write for the various journals to find out what the national name of the forefathers of these peoples were. Also look into the history of the founders of civilization and see who they were and where they stood in the building of the present civilization. Probably 2 hours in an up-to-date library would serve to relieve the strain of our men of letters when the occasion presents itself for a title for these people.
Facts.
The matter of the various names given to these 22 million people with all colors of every race of the globe was an act of European psychology.
That's right.
1928.
They gave him a name, then defined it as something inferior to theirs.
Woo.
White, they defined as a color of purity. Black, they say, represents everything of evil. The Negro, as they were called in this nation, have no nation to which they may look with pride. Right? Their history starts with the close of the Civil War, or more properly with his being forced to serve someone else. Thus, he is separated from the illustrious history of his forefathers, who were the founders of the first civilization of the old world. This matter should be looked into with the hope of correcting it.
Yes, sir.
Islam.
Islam.
The American Anthropological Association Statement on Race. Historical research has shown that the idea of, quote, race has always carried more meanings than mere physical differences.
Wow.
Indeed, physical variations in the human species have no meaning except the social ones that humans put on them. And interestingly enough, go back more.
Yes, sir.
And that's from the executive board of the American Anthropological Association. And again, you have that 1998 date, which is the same year as the other definition that we read earlier. So, because at this time, the scientific community universally regarded all the race science as pseudo. All the race science of the early 20th century, the 1800s, is universally looked in the scientific community now as just pseudo.
That's right.
Have no basis in any kind of scientific reality. Right? From the book The Invention of White People by Theodore W. Allen. When the first Africans arrived in Virginia in 1916, there were 1616, and we know there's a dispute about that date, but for the sake of this is where he's coming from. There were no white people there. Nor, according to colonial records, would there be for another 60 years. Wow. Right? Because again, in the colonial records, people were referred to as British, Englishmen, or Spaniards, or Portuguese, or Christians, not white.
Right.
There was no white people,
That's right.
right? And that's more realistic of what they are. It's interestingly enough, in one of my sessions where I had some European American graduate students, and she was like, wow, I've never thought of myself outside of my white identity. This is the first time ever, and you can see the wind being let out of their sails when this knowledge was stripping them of their whiteness. And and it leaves them as just plain Europeans or whatever European nation they get themselves from.
I'll bet it's Marquette.
Question. Yes, sir.
I was watching a video. It was Ebro in the morning, and they took a DNA test. They were taking DNA tests, and it was a assistant that was doing the DNA testing. Ebro found out he was Portuguese, and he assumed the Portuguese was Europeans, and he was like, man, that guy's supposed to have been, black, right? And then the Jewish brother Rosenberg, he's a European. He was like, man, you guys get to say you're African. That's cool. He was like, because Africa is something. He was like, me, I'm just white. Wow. And that was the first time I ever thought about white stripped them of their nationality too.
Yes, it did.
And it was done for a specific reason by the primarily British elite.
That's right.
Right? And it was a mechanism of forming a confederation of European nations under this one thing. It unified them.
That's right.
In their opposition to darker people.
Correct.
Within American context. So it was the appearance of white first appeared in 1681. Excuse me. Because in 1664 there was this law passed, as it mentioned, that sought not to prohibit but punish British or other freeborn women who married enslaved African men of African descent. It was, and then he mentioned the roughly 10-to-1 ratio of British, primarily British, women to men. Because what was happening was, even though they imposed that punishment, the amalgamation was off the charts. The British women was overwhelmingly choosing men of African men. And there were widespread marriages that happened. Now, the slave owning class, they encouraged that because the law in seeking to punish them said that the progeny of these unions would be enslaved. So for slave owners, they was like, oh, this is cool. They encouraged these marriages because it increased their property value.
Right.
Because the progeny would be slaves, right? So it had the opposite effect in that it spread amalgamation among these two groups more widely, right? So then later they tried to correct that, where they imposed another law where they said that anyone who performed these marriages to the clergy would be punished. So again, they were losing their women in competition with African men at a great level, so they tried to pull that back, right, in the law. And that's when the term English or freeborn women in Maryland, and freeborn English and other white women, it was the first time that this designation of whiteness appeared officially on the rolls. And again, this is the late 1600s, so this is prior to the American Revolution, prior to the country being born as a nation, right? But these social mores that set in as a result, ironically, of the anti-miscegenation laws, and then, of course, of Bacon's Rebellion, which scared the elites, terrified them. Because what they saw was Native Americans, Africans, and poor Europeans linked up. And they like, oh boy, they vastly outnumber us. They can come together and they actually had to call in the British troops from England to squash this rebellion. It lasted over a year, right? So in their planning of how to prevent this from happening again so that they can preserve their wealth and their standing, they created this thing called whiteness. And it was unique. It was a departure from English law and society, because in Britain or in English UK, there was no identification of the lower classes with the upper classes. That didn't exist. But they appropriated the poor Europeans by saying, hey, we're all white. And they allotted specific privileges to them under this designation white, where these now poor Europeans, as you said, now had some people that they were over, even though their lot was scarcely better than Africa, scarcely better than enslaved Africans and Native Americans. The seeds of rebellion, as mentioned, that was readily available labor pool of poor British that ended. At one time, it was like a great pool of labor that was coming over from Britain. European bond laborers faced longer terms because that tobacco was becoming very profitable, and it needed a lot of workers, so they was extending their terms of indenture. There was a large increase in the number of enslaved Africans. Tobacco prices dropped, taxes increases, and the land and opportunities for servants after terms of service became more limited. So all of these factors contributed to this Bacon's Rebellion. Yes, sir. The lessons of Bacon's Rebellion. United labor force is a threat to the form of capitalism taking hold within the colonies. Right?
Yep.
And you're going to see how some of these same issues are relevant today. A united labor force is a threat to capitalism. That's how unions were born, right?
That's right.
Virginia lawmakers wrote a letter to legal oversight authority in England, indicated they intended to use a divide and conquer strategy, and they masters of that, in order to prevent rebellion. That's how they was able to exploit Africa. Because Africa has such ethnic diversity that it was easy to come in and divide and conquer. Right? It is only after Bacon's Rebellion that we see the emergence of, quote, white people. Prior to that, in the laws and the newspaper articles, etc., they were identified by their nationalities and or their religion. After the rebellion, then you start to see this thing, white, popping up in the laws. White people built upon the idea of the British as, quote, Christian, freeborn, and deserving of rights and privileges from which, quote, others can be denied. And Brother Sharif often makes the points that this idea of non-white, you have whites and then they say non-whites, that's centering whiteness, that's the standard, and other people are the others, and they were relegated to the lower aspects of society as a result. White is the tool by which laborers were divided. It denoted the superiority to non-whites through the laws with the privileges. Worked to connect European laborers to the British elite. And you see that now where poor Europeans identify with a billionaire like Trump. They have nothing in common. Nothing. They both have.
Nothing.
But in their twisted mentalities, because of their shared quote-unquote whiteness, they are disillusioned into not supporting their own self-interest because of this idea of whiteness. And that last point is very important. Go back. There was no genetic shift.
That's right.
After the law was passed, there wasn't any genetic shift that contributed to them suddenly becoming white.
That's right.
So the socioeconomic ladder was created as a result. You had the landholding elite at the top, that we might compare in today's vernacular as the 1%. And then you have whites and quote-unquote blacks and Native Americans were relegated to the lower stratum of society. Now, at this time, our good brother, the Honorable Elijah Muhammad, he hasn't come along yet to redefined blackness,
Right.
which fueled the black consciousness movement,
That's right.
which fueled the black power movement,
That's right.
which fueled the black studies programs at colleges. That hadn't happened yet. So when Noble Drew Ali was disavowing that term in the 20s, none of this stuff after him had occurred yet.
Right.
Right.
But he was referring to blackness being used within this sense of a lower stratus of society,
Yes, sir.
a slave, right? And that's why he disavowed the term,
Yes, sir.
right? And we already spoke about why he disavowed the white term. Even in describing our skin color, he used the term what?
Olive.
Olive. And we've all seen the photos depicted, we put it up in the board, of this bowl full of olives in all the different tones. You've got dark olives on your pizza that they call black olives, all the way up to the lightness and everything in between.
That's right.
He was given more as a different world view. He did not buy into the United States view, color-coded caste system.
That's right.
That's right.
That's what it is.
Are there any questions thus far? Yes, sir. Comments? Go
Yeah,
ahead.
well, I'm trying to think. So, like the woman who said to you, someone said earlier, it's about some woman that said, "I just realized that I don't think I've ever seen myself as white." Do you ever
No,
come
she
across?
said she never saw herself outside of her
Oh,
whiteness.
outside of the whiteness. Do you ever come across Europeans who try and disconnect themselves from whiteness to disconnect themselves from the privilege that they get from whiteness? Like, oh, I'm not white, cool, so I don't deal with race or privileges. Do they ever do that?
I don't see color.
Yeah. Do they ever run that
Black
game?
society stuff?
Yeah.
Must be nice.
Yeah, you have that as well. You definitely have that as well. But you know, I bring to the attention that you still benefit
That's
from
right.
the associated privileges of that designation. 'Cause
Correct.
it's like the brother says, institution. It's
That's right.
systemic.
That's right.
Right? So I'm going to end with a short video from Sister Dr. Nell Irvin Painter, and she's speaking on how the definition of whiteness has expanded, because even back then it wasn't clearly defined. Right? It's never been clearly defined because, again, it's not scientific.
Right.
It's a socio-political construction that was created for specific purposes. Right? And she has a book, I can't think of the name of it. But what she does is documented how black and white have been used over not only centuries, over millenniums in different cultures in various different ways. Right? There was one time in Arabia, they said you was white, you can be jet black, and they would say you was white because it was indicative of your character and
Correct.
your flawless
That's
complexion.
right. That's right.
He's white, right? So it depends upon what time period, what nation, what society you deal with, what the definitions of black and white are. So again, our prophet Noble Drew Ali, Decentering Whiteness. He looked at American society through a very critical lens, and he taught more as Americans in accordance with that. And the society is just starting to catch up to him, and where you hear now social justice activists and whatnot are having these conversations around decentering whiteness. All right, unfortunately. So she briefly went into how in the 20th century, how whiteness, the definition expanded because groups like from Southern Europe, like Italians, some Jewish groups, they were not automatically designated as white because of their because they came from Europe. You know, they in fact had to put in work in America for a couple of generations before they received honorary white status.
That's right.
That's right.
Islam? Are there any other questions or comments? Yes,
One
sir.
thing, well, I think about Haiti, after they had their rebellion, I just read this recently, the Haitians adopted the Irish into black.
Correct.
Wow.
Didn't know this, but they said they're black and the rest of the people were white, and they adopted the Irish and the black because they fought with them against the French. So in Haiti, the Irish are black. I don't know if that's still true today, but they adopted it and wrote it in their constitution.
You also recall the bomber in Boston who was from Russia. They was
Yes.
like he was from the black Russians.
Yeah.
Even though he obviously pale skinned, right? But within Russian society, that blackness still carried that that lower strata
It was
of
Muslim too,
connotation.
wasn't
Yes, sir.
To that point, brother, that's powerful because they showed his picture, and of course he looked to us like a European,
Yeah, he's straight white over there.
with dark hair,
Yeah.
right? But he was. This is what's really interesting. He was called in his culture. He's called black.
Yeah.
Why? Because the people of the Western Caucasus, who had ancient ties to the Muslims, right? That's how they got their black hair. They were called black because they had black hair, and they're Caucasians from the Caucasus.
Wow.
And the federal directive that you see when you apply for jobs, the race questions, etc., it says straight up, these designations are not meant to be anthropological.
Yep.
Right.
And
Yep.
grouped under whiteness now are North Africans, and then we know it's mad dark-colored people in North Africa.
Right.
And Middle Eastern people are now designated as white. Because for one thing, it's about political power.
Yes.
Right? That was one reason why they opened the floodgates and allowed so many Europeans in, because we had majorities in a lot of areas within
Yes, sir.
the United States of America.
That's fact.
Evidenced by the fact in Reconstruction we took over so many state legislatures.
That's right.
So in opening the floodgates and allowing these Europeans to come in was to tip the balance, population-wise, as it affects political power, so that they can wield that power. Right? Yes, sir.
Yeah, when I'm in processing soldiers, in particular the Hispanic or Asian soldiers, when it goes to race, I mean, it'll say for like the ethnic group, it'll say Asian or say Hispanic.
Yep.
But when it says race, it says white.
Yep. Yep.
They're categorized as white.
Yes, sir.
Well, I was just about to bring this up. At my school, we're dealing with this exact thing. Our Mexican American students are coming to us because they're forcing them to put white or black. And ain't nobody trying to check black, right? So they're forcing them to. And now when you look at statistics, even if you go to Wikipedia and demographics, it'll say white, non-white, Hispanic.
That's right.
And so they are now realizing that another group is about to overtake whiteness, and they're like, well, we can just kind of bring y'all into whiteness.
That's correct.
And I was in Chicago. It was a woman who literally, you could tell how it's messing people up. She was, I believe, Puerto Rican or Cuban. And she's like, I'm white. Why don't they just accept me? Look at my skin, I'm white. And we were like, sister, it's not, I know it seemed like it's based on that, but not really. She was like, but I'm white.
Yeah.
And I just wish they would accept me as who I am. It was like watching like a mind mess up right in front of you and watching this play out. But yeah, they get slick with the whiteness thing too.
Yes, sir.
Brother, to your point about political power, even from an international perspective, right? What you described about, the redefining of whiteness to, it's like telling a lie and then you got to tell another lie on top of it to keep the position, right? That's literally what's happening right now in every urban center in the country, where you had white flight in the 60s as a result of the civil rights movement, and now they're like, now we got to retake the urban centers. Why? Because all the urban centers nationwide are majority Asiatic, and if they ever figure it out and unify politically, we've lost it overnight. So that's literally what gentrification is doing.
Sure is.
That's it.
And she also mentioned, like in the 21st century, among the higher tier of earners, which she say is a diversity of different hues and whatnot, whiteness is becoming less relevant, right? But she says in turn, blackness though will still be relegated to mean lower class, outgrowth of slavery and lower class, etc., which I found that very interesting. And we are already seeing some studies that even in the criminal justice system, the designation African American is looked at more favorably than black.
Right.
Right. So we have this tension between how we redefine blackness in our movements and how blackness is viewed by the larger society.
That's right.
And with that, yes, sir, go ahead.
Oh, it just kind of seems like the ADOS movement is kind of missing the fact that of a nationality, the fact that they're saying ADOS, they're trying to find a name. And
It continues. Those different names for us, it continues.
That's different though, because that's an organization, and there's a purpose behind that name.
Right.
So the purpose behind that name is to show the African descendants of slaves, you know, the ones who actually have relatives that were kin to slaves, because when it comes down to it, you know, you got these immigrants that are coming here.
Wouldn't that be Moorish Americans?
And they're saying, and they're, well, they didn't enslave us as Moorish Americans. They don't call us that. But you got these immigrants that are coming here, and they're saying, well, what about us? Aren't we supposed to get reparations too? You know, so we're black, we got dark skin, so they're making a distinction.
That's right.
You know, it's not a nationality or an ethnicity. It's just
No more $5 Indians.
right.
Yeah, because our labor was real. No one can come in 300 years later and try to attach themselves to that particular experience. It's
That's
unique to us. And it also speaks to the fact that we've been here much longer than most Americans.
That's a fact.
Most Americans are recent within the last 100 years immigrants.
That's fact.
Right? We're some of the oldest people. We are some of the oldest Americans. Without a doubt.
I mean, it's just, you know, it's not particularly on the top, but the Moorish Science Temple of America is older than 85% of the African nations.
Yes.
That's right.
Fact.
Yes.
I appreciate your input, your sharing, and your attention. Islam.
Allahu Akbar. Hayya ala salah. Allahu Akbar.